One of the reasons I was drawn to OSR style RPG games was the fact that it felt like the game was inherently risky. Risky in that it wasn't a gimme that the players would be successful in their adventuring. This is kind of this idea of high stakes play. Cutting my teeth on modern editions of D&D, it felt like it was difficult for the players to actually fail in their adventuring. It just seemed like they had so many different fail-safe mechanisms that help keep the player characters alive or in the action. Now, it's certainly possible to challenge and defeat a party of 5th edition characters. If you, the GM, so choose, you could put any different type of monster in front of them and give them any different type of overpowered ability. That's not really what I'm talking about. When you look at the game's challenge rating system and their different balancing mechanisms that the game provides, it just kind of felt like it was lacking, and it put a lot of onus on the game master to make those stakes a lot higher. On top of that, with the prevalence of the narrative arc campaign being one of the dominant styles of play, it didn't feel great to have player characters die or be incapacitated mid-campaign. If they do, then you have to find this reason for why this new character comes in and gets involved. Again, it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It just sort of felt like there was this friction there. And all of this friction really amounted to this idea of a bland game for me. A game that had no real risk in it. And if there's no real risk, then there's no real reward for the players because they can't actually really earn anything if it's just kind of handed to them. And to me, that just really felt uninspired. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today, at the risk of sounding like a grumpy old man that claims the world has gone soft, I want to talk about why I think you need to have high stakes scenarios in your RPG games. So let's get into it. What do we mean by high stakes? High stakes are simply the challenge that the party faces. It could be anything from robbing a band of goblins of their gold to trying to defeat a despotic warlord and free a country. In either case, there needs to be risk and a possible reward for the party. Lastly, the outcome should not be predetermined. Only the player's actions, their opposition's reactions, and the rolls of the dice are going to determine what actually happens at the table and what becomes the story and the fiction that you're creating with your players. High stakes matter because we are playing a game. There should be an uncertain outcome that the party is working towards. That's kind of the whole point of playing a game. We don't know what's going to happen until the actions are resolved at the table. And those actions should have consequences. Sometimes the party succeeds, sometimes the party fails, but either way, something is going to happen. The story that's made at the table is what emerges from those actions. And I think that's what really makes tabletop role-playing games so great. The players have the agency to try out different things. This means the players can try out different plans, and if they have good plans, and more often than not, they're going to be successful. And if they come up with bad plans, then more often than not, they're going to come up with failures. If you or your players don't want agency, then you should probably just read a book or watch a TV show. Heck, even most video games don't have real agency like a tabletop role-playing game does. The question then becomes, how high should you set the stakes? And the answer to that is they should be high enough that the players are going to care about the result. Does high stakes mean high lethality? No, but also yes. OSR style games often get a bad rap for being incredibly lethal. There's things like save or die mechanics. Most characters are relatively low powered compared to their modern complements, and they have a lot lower hit points than you also see in modern games. Well, there's no getting around that OSR games are more lethal than you'd see in most modern editions. There's no yo-yo style healing from falling unconscious only to being battle ready again after a single healing word spell, and OSR games have no 3 strikes you're out death saving mechanic. It is worth mentioning that it's quite common to see OSR game masters introduce some sort of death-defying house rule mechanic, but it's still going to be usually a lot less generous than modern style mechanics that are baked into the rules as written. So I think the lethality does remain. But it's important to remember that high stakes doesn't mean the only outcome for failure is death. But I think if you remove the possibility for character death from the equation because you're afraid of your players losing their characters, or your players are afraid of losing their characters, the ones they're so invested in, we start to feel like a lot of other fail states shouldn't be possible either. Oh, I don't want the character to lose their arm because then the ranger can't shoot their bow. Oh, I don't want the character to be taken hostage because then they can't play that character for the next few sessions until they're rescued. I know because I've game mastered down that style of play before. When I first started out and I was trying to make more narrative arc style games, I didn't want the player characters to lose because then their story couldn't be told. And I've now realized that that's sort of a flawed line of thinking because it leads down to all these other fail states being removed by the game master, whether it's consciously or not. And at that point, you aren't really playing a probabilistic dice game anymore because you're safeguarding against so many of those different failed outcomes. And I guess when I got to the end of my 5th edition game mastering time, I just really felt like the games were bland because they lacked that kind of sharpness. They lacked those high stakes because the system inherently had a lot of safeguards against it, but also I had that kind of line of thinking where I didn't want the characters to be lost because they were so invested in them. I believe when you introduce high stakes into your role-playing games, you are letting the players actually get more attached to their characters because they're the ones that are making the choices for those characters, and there's a real possibility of failure. And that makes the situation a lot more interesting for everyone at the table, and the players get more invested in finding out what's going to happen next. And I think they really buy into the narrative or the emergent narrative that's happening. And, if their character dies, then that's unfortunate. Losing characters does suck, but it sort of builds the tension and it adds to the kind of verisimilitude of the game and the fiction that you're creating. If you're running a tabletop role-playing game with high stakes, you should not be fudging dice rolls. I make my rolls out in the open just like the rest of the other players. A hit is a hit, and if the dice say it does enough damage to mortally wound a PC, then so be it. Rolling in the open forces you to be honest. The result is right there. Everyone can see it, and that's exactly how it should be. Remember, we're playing a game, not reading a book. Fudging the dice also results in agency being taken away from your players. Their actions don't actually matter because you are there to modify the outcome for good or bad. That sucks, and that's a bad feeling for the players when they learn that you're doing that. It's important to remember that once the game gets to a point where actions are being left to chance, aka the roll of the dice, then all parties need to be prepared to accept the outcome of those results. You, as the impartial referee, need to be the paragon of upholding this idea. If the players are able to cheese a villain because their save or suck spell succeeds, then that's just how the dice fell. In a sandbox style game, your villains aren't these world-destroying scale oppositions anyways, so if they die, then so be it. Likewise, it's not your job to save the players from their own risky actions. The player characters are putting themselves in danger. They're faced with these high stakes, so they should be invested and they should be prepared to accept the outcomes that happen when the dice fall as they do. So that's it. Sometimes the dice roll with the players and they succeed, and other times the dice break against them and they fail. Yeah, it sucks losing a player character. A lot of people really do get attached and invested to their characters, and it's often frustrating to say goodbye when you feel like the character was lost before their time. But I caution us to remember that most of these games, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or any sort of popular offshoot, all bill themselves as sort of heroic fantasy style games. Your characters can only be heroic if they are faced with risky scenarios to earn those rewards of glory and heroism. If you rob your game of stakes by refusing to let your players face the consequences of failure, then that's not very heroic at all, now is it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.